Hello, everyone, and welcome to Did it start? Okay, I'm sorry. Facebook has now put me on a new live. Okay, it's going. Is it going? It took a minute. There was a delay. I now see a ticker going. Okay, I think I'm actually live. All right, I apologize because Facebook has now forced me to use their new live producer instead of the old screen that I was used to for going live, and it shifted everything from one side of my screen to the other. So now where I usually sit doesn't quite have the same background, and it's a whole other screen for how things go live. So I couldn't really tell if I was on or not. And it's showing me lots of different things at the bottom of the screen, which is odd too. Okay, I think we're all set. Hi, I'm Dr. Whitney, Dr. Mom ND, and this is our 44th Wellness Wednesday, which means we've been doing this for 44 weeks. And I believe the last 6 weeks have all been talking about COVID. Yay! So once again, I actually thought for once I would be able to not talk about it this week, but I started to see so many new, what do I want to say? Not new sources, but new types of information coming forward from very well-educated people, very knowledgeable people, other doctors. And I feel like I'm starting to make sense of it all. And it's interesting because my husband asked me this morning, what are you going to talk about today? And I said, I don't really know, but I think it's coming to me. I think what it's boiling down to is going back to the foundational naturopathic approach, because what I have heard doctors talk about, what I have heard them educate about, what I have seen them write about and research about this week is the idea that it all boils down to the immune system. And there's so many competing theories out there. And yes, some of them are very far out and crazy, but even the most crazy theory at some point, right, the most outlandish story has a grain of salt in the truth because it came from somewhere. And so even if a little bit of something could be true, is it really that outlandish? There's always going to be people who take it too far, but there's also going to be people who are too conservative and don't consider all of the possibilities, right? And this is something that we need to seriously be considering, all the possibilities. I tried to make myself a list because I had so many thoughts that were just all coming to me at the same time so that I could formulate this into a cohesive presentation today. So I think where I'll start is just how this has evolved this week, in the sense that I've been sharing on my Facebook page, Whitney C. Naturopathic Doc, not necessarily my business page, videos and articles and studies as I have found them that have been sort of the path that I have been taking this week and getting a broader understanding of this. And I think one of the reasons that it makes sense, and this is always the discussion I have with patients, is they'll say, well, is it possible that this is causing this? Is it possible that by taking this, I did that? And the thing I always say is, anything's possible. If it's logical, if you can make the logical connection, and you stop doing the thing that you think was causing your problem and you get better, do we really need more proof than that? Everybody's going to respond to therapies differently. So it's always hard for me to get on board with the idea that any one thing is going to be the right treatment, cure, or prevention for the entire population. And a lot of that has to do with, again, the naturopathic foundation of how we approach care in the therapeutic order. And I was going to have a printout for you because I wanted to show you, but it's what I used in my talk about the Carroll food intolerance and how diet affects inflammation and everything else in your body a few weeks ago. And so I'll try to put a link in the comments, but basically for naturopathic doctors, we have an approach to care that we call the therapeutic order. It's the way in which we understand the body heals. So it's the appropriate way to approach someone's care. And it kind of looks like the food pyramid, basically. So the bottom of the pyramid is a row, and what's in there is the determinants of health. And I've talked about this before. The fact that the things that determine your health are things like clean air, clean water, clean food, rest, and knowing what foods are not compatible with your body. That falls into, I think, part of the clean food, right? So it's important to have clean food, but also know what food is not compatible with your body. And that's where the Carroll method, I mean, that was the point of me sharing that during that talk, was to show how the Carroll method is used to address individual food intolerances, to individualize your diet from any general plan you might be doing like keto or paleo, and that you can't skip over that step and go up 2 steps per se to supplements, right? Like you can't just supplement yourself to health. It's not going to work. I mean, it'll manage things, but it's never going to truly fix them. And so addressing the determinants of health are the things that set the stage for a strong immune system and a properly functioning body. So one of the videos that I shared was from Dr. Shiva, who has like 4 different PhDs from MIT. And you have to look past a little bit of his political grandstanding because he is running for office. But the majority of his video is about the immune system and understanding that viruses are not causing the symptoms that we're seeing. What you see is, and I have read this in other places about people making the argument that a virus isn't really alive and a virus isn't what's actually causing the symptoms that we experience. It's our body's response to the virus, and that an unhealthy body will have an improper response, hence worse symptoms, other damage. And that's the whole argument behind the cytokine storm right now, right? Why people are saying, take elderberry, don't take elderberry, because it upregulates these inflammatory responses, which, just like with food, if they are upregulated for too long, if there's chronic inflammation for too long, it becomes damaging. And it escalates. And especially in the sense of our immune system and all these chemical messengers, these cytokines that trigger all the different responses that we have, they're exponential. So 1 affects 10 and those 10 affect 10 each. And so it escalates very quickly. And then that's why taking something that further upregulates that can be damaging. And that's where the argument behind not taking elderberry right now has sort of become centerfold. And really, I'll just give you the key to that. And the key is, if you're taking it and you get better, fine. But if you're taking it and you get worse, then that is the time that you stop taking it, because it's obviously not helping you get better. If you're getting worse, you stop and you take something else that's not going to upregulate those things at that time. In fact, what I just read, what comes to mind in the Herbal Antivirals book, was the fact when I was reading the chapter, it was predominantly initially more about the flu, was that there were a couple of specific messengers that early on your immune system's inflammatory-ish response was that feeling of fatigue and wearing down and that sort of nausea and unease. That's not the virus causing that. That was the cells in your body. What they were doing in response to the virus was giving you those symptoms. So it's interesting then that Dr. Shiva talked so much about the fact that, and he gets a little intense and a little crazy about, how adamant he is about some of these things. So, I think it's a little far out right now for me to tell people that viruses don't exist. Okay, well, we know there's something, but what that something is not exactly what is causing the symptoms. What are causing the symptoms and why we're seeing such a variety of them is because people are in such ill health. So this whole concept of an underlying condition, you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis, right? You don't have to have a diagnosis of some kind of autoimmune condition or have cancer or have a respiratory condition to, quote, have an underlying condition. In this sense, what we're saying is anybody with a improper functioning immune system, and whether that's autoimmune because you're already in immune overdrive, or an under functioning immune system because of everything else that affects your health that we've already talked about: clean air, clean water, clean food, inflammation, food intolerances. I've been seeing a lot more talk of inflammation popping into the conversations about COVID now, and the things that they're seeing as symptomatic, and why these things are these other therapies are maybe beneficial. It's because they're addressing the symptoms and the inflammation, right? I heard a gal on NPR this morning that was basically the head of antiviral research somewhere. And the talk was specifically about hydroxychloroquine, which is for malaria, and the comments that are being made that this cures COVID. And again, it comes back to the understanding that none of our antiviral drugs are antiviral in the sense that antibiotics kill bacteria. Antiviral drugs are at some point in the process interfering with how the virus gets in, binds to us, and replicates itself. In response to all of those steps, our body has its own response, its immune system response. And some of those things are too inflammatory or too damaging. And what the drug is doing, some of the drugs are either interfering with the process of the virus in that cycle, or they're interfering with the process of the inflammatory response. And what the gal said, the head of antiviral medicine research, said about hydroxychloroquine is that it's not, again, killing the virus. It's not antiviral. What they think it's actually doing is having an effect on the inflammation, yet again, of the processes that are happening in the body as a result of the infection. So people are essentially, if you can manage the response to the virus, is what it seems like. You can manage that in a healthy way to help your body guide its response and the symptoms that you're seeing as a result of that. In a healthy way, you can get over the infection. In fact, a colleague of mine shared an article that Cuomo, not the governor's younger brother, Chris Cuomo, the guy that's on CNN, his wife was quoted as saying, there are no conventional answers for this. So she enrolled the services of a doctor. I'm not sure if she's actually a naturopathic doctor, but the point was, they said she's using all manner of natural substances to help her husband through this time. And that included homeopathics and Ayurveda, which is basically herbal medicine. And so ultimately what we know that they're doing is, again, they're trying to not manipulate necessarily, but help the body properly respond to the infection. So again, it's not necessarily the virus itself that is being, quote, treated. It's our immune system's response to it, which is getting out of hand. And if you think about it, that makes sense, because first it was a fever. Then it was the dry cough, the sore throat, the shortness of breath, maybe the diagnosis of pneumonia by just having the chest x-ray with the fluid in there. Then we started to hear that some people were losing taste, or the sense of taste or smell. And now recently, yesterday, I saw a new symptom is eye pain. Now, why would there be so many different symptoms to one virus? That's what makes me start to really critically think about this. Because if you think about the flu, we know what the characteristic flu symptoms are. And that is how you make a diagnosis of someone, right? That is the definition of conventional medicine. You identify a certain number of symptoms or levels of things that you measure in the body via labs, and that designates a certain diagnosis, which then dictates the appropriate treatment. So what do you do when your symptoms are so broad? How do you narrow that down to one diagnosis? And so that's why I think this really is speaking to the fact that this is a broader issue of I want to say compromise, because that makes it sound like it's an immune compromised person, of people's immune systems not properly responding. And I think that's the best way to say it, because is it an over response? Is it an under response? Whatever's happening, it's the response of the body, a body that's already been compromised some way with poor food choices, poor water, poor sleep, poor air quality, just in general being run down. And so I think, like everyone, we got excited, and even natural practitioners were jumping down the hole of, oh, this herb does it and that herb does it. And I've had this happen a couple times with patients too, because you get really excited as they talk about their symptoms. And you're like, oh, I could do this and I could do that. And, there's this treatment. And yet when you step back and look at the whole picture and still address the fundamental things, all the pieces fall back in place, because all of those symptoms, no matter what's really causing them, symptoms are always your body's way of telling you that something's wrong, that it needs help, something's not responding the way it should. And so I think we just simply need to pay more attention to those things, and not so much on trying to figure out a quote cure or treatment, because I think there are going to be many, because there's many different symptomatic pictures that people are presenting with, and different drugs do different things. And so, yeah, somebody might be singing the praises of hydroxychloroquine. Somebody might be singing the praises of high-dose IV vitamin C. I think people are just finding that different things work for different reasons. And I am not surprised that vitamin C and vitamin D and iodine and vitamin A are being shown to have such great effects, because what they all are at the root is they're all antioxidants. So in high enough doses, they're like super antioxidants. They go all around the body and they protect cells from damage, from free radical oxidizing damage, which is what is essentially happening when you have this infection and you have all these symptoms. It's a result of the damage that's being done to your body. So again, when you start to think about things critically and think about, okay, well, why are they seeing significant improvement with vitamin C? Well, what is it doing? It's an antioxidant. It's neutralizing free radicals. It's, protecting the cells from damage, protecting them from inflammation. So I think there's going to be a lot of different pieces to this as we go forward. But I think the bigger idea here today is, just like Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, who is an ICU doctor in New York City. I shared his YouTube videos on my page as well this week. He has a couple different ones, and he is quoted as saying too, he's not quoted, he's saying it himself, this is not just pneumonia. This is not just one thing. What we're seeing is a presentation of people and scenarios with different symptoms that, a ventilator is not the only answer, or if it is, it's not being used in the right way. It's more of what he said, an issue of like oxygen deprivation. And so when you put the ventilator on at the settings they're supposed to use, they're actually going to cause more harm than good, because they're forcing the air in and they're forcing it into a system that can't handle it because it's compromised. So he was really pleading, with people in the sense that they're trying to get a handle on it, but ultimately, there is no clear-cut clinical picture. They still can't say, oh, you have a fever and a dry cough and a sore throat and you're tired and your eyes hurt. Oh, that must be COVID. There's nothing like that. And so what they're relying on are tests, which is this whole other issue, right? So I read another great article today from a guy who's a big researcher in EMF. And that's another sort of road I went down in terms of understanding the things that affect our immune system, all of the things I've already talked about. So, my big platform as a naturopathic doctor is food. So I have always counseled people to the importance of food is always a part of the problem. Well, this guy's platform is that EMFs are always part of the problem. And so I kind of went down that road, and I shared a couple other articles that I found yesterday. A study on PubMed that back in 1998, a study confirmed that people's headaches were correlated with their use of cell phones. They proved that there were biological effects from these radio waves, which I honestly find, so it's not comforting, but it helps me confirm that what I've been doing all along is right, because the Carroll method is based on frequency. And so another person I saw was writing about the fact that Tesla identified that the body's frequencies operate in a range of 6 to 8, I think it was just hertz. And these additional higher, more powerful frequencies that we see are hundreds and billions of times the frequency of what our body is used to dealing with. So this one study all the way back in 1998 said, yes, we did find a direct correlation between cell phones and headaches in people. So we know that there are biological effects of these things. So you go down that, there's a lot of other research out there. I shared another site that has tons and tons of articles and studies and things that show the same kind of symptoms can come from that exposure. And I've seen a whole family that swears up and down all of their symptoms came as a result of radiation. So everything, there was no cell phones in their house, there was no cordless phones, there was no Wi-Fi, they had one hardwired computer, no smart TVs. And I saw them like a year ago, and their family had things like headaches and digestive issues, and the one kid was sick sometimes, another person had skin issues. And so again, now I'm seeing that there are studies out there, and I've been personally trying to do some of this myself for a while too. Getting the cell phone, these safe sleeve covers on my phone. I don't know if this is the best one ever, but it says right in the thing, radiation protection. When I had kids, this is kind of what started it. I wanted to protect my kids. I wanted to make sure I had a safe baby monitor. I turned the Wi-Fi off at home. I want to Ethernet our house so that our TVs and our computers are hardwired, because they show that these things can affect your immune system. And that's what one of the sites shared. That's the quote. That's the part I pulled out and shared, that these waves have effects on our immune system too. So when you want to talk about underlying conditions, the reason people are more susceptible, okay? We've shared studies about the flu shot, viral interference. When you mess with one response, an artificial response in the immune system towards one virus, you complicate the response to another. Those people are more susceptible. If you've gotten a flu shot, you're more susceptible to this infection, okay? China made some observation about blood types. Why were blood types A more susceptible than blood types O? They don't know. That's just an observation they made with the people they had. What else? We know the underlying conditions. We talked about obese people, smokers, people with asthma, elderly, people who are immune compromised. Inflammation, if you are eating foods that are not compatible with your body. That was the whole podcast that I did last week. One of the ways to keep your immune system strong with food, not just taking food-based supplements or eating a lot of garlic at home, but eating foods that are compatible with your body. Because if you eat things that aren't compatible with your body, you cause this chronic inflammation. It results in your body being too busy dealing with that when it comes to your immune system having the proper response to something. And this is just another piece of the puzzle. Now, maybe this is part of it. Maybe we should, we know that there are studies done that show that screen activity, too much screen time on kids makes them crazy. Okay. My kids are a perfect example of this. They were bonkers yesterday for like the last 24 hours. There was a full moon last night. I cut them off of sugar. I tried to keep them away from the TV and the tablets, but I can tell my 3-year-old son, if he's on his tablet too long, he becomes a total a-hole. I mean, like obstinate, whiny, throwing things, hitting. It's crazy. I mean, they've done the studies to show that these things have an effect. So my point here is, if you're going to talk about the complete gamut of things that could be contributing to a system that is not responding appropriately to a viral infection, which is why we're seeing the wide array of symptoms, the wide array of potential ways to deal with it. I won't say treat or cure it, because we can't say that, because nothing is proven until the FDA says it is. So it's stuff to consider. It's part of the picture. And I think, things continue to tie together the more I look at them. And this guy who generally writes about EMF stuff, and I have been following him for a while because I really have been meaning to go more down that tunnel, because there's a lot of natural practitioners out there right now talking about, reducing your exposure to these things at home. And then this whole idea that 5G is going to be, just way, way worse than what we've got right now. And that's the reason that some countries are banning it, because there's not enough safety studies. I even remember a friend telling me years ago, when her family had a farm and they put up these high power lines above, that the cows would randomly die, and that eventually they had to move the farm because the vet was like, well, I don't have anything for you except that, we've heard other farmers say the same thing. And once they put up these big power lines, it's, some of the cows don't make it. So we know there's biological effects, and we know there's frequency in the body because people have studied it. Tesla studied it. He knew it. That's a big part of what we're essentially looking at with the Carroll method. We're looking for foods that are compatible with the body. We're looking at frequency. So it's not that big of a stretch for me anyways to make that other things could be interfering with that frequency as well, not just food, and the more interference that's happening in our body, the more poorly our body is going to respond. That doesn't mean you're immune compromised. It doesn't mean your immune system's shot. It just means it's confused. And so there are lots of things, like we talked about, fundamental things from a naturopathic perspective to address, to make sure that your body is strong, resilient, whatever you want to say, and that your immune system is having the proper response. Okay. So this gentleman I was following, Nick, the EMF guy, I'm going to share his article too. It's literally so long, I couldn't even get through it. I had to stop. But it is one of the best researched, well-articulated things that I have come across. He is known as having very calm, all-encompassing, well presented, not arguments, but sources of information out there. And he has to be, because he's someone who's concerned about EMFs, and people take that too far and go down conspiracy theory road, and then they get no credibility. So we want to roll it back to taking it seriously and looking at well-respected double-blind studies, which they have done. And so he at first admits he never wanted to address this issue of coronavirus, but he ended up doing it. So it's literally, I couldn't even print it out because it was 120 pages. Granted, it's like a column that prints, so it only took up half the page. But even if I reduced the size, it just reduced the column. It didn't print on more of the page. So I was going to print out 80 pages. But his article is awesome because it's called 8 Inconvenient Truths About the Coronavirus. And that's exactly what it is. He's not arguing that it doesn't exist. He's not arguing that it can't be deadly or that it's completely made up. What he is doing is simply presenting inconvenient facts, inconvenient truths about the path that we're taking with this right now. And one of the biggest things he talks about is the numbers. So from someone who has taken statistics classes and research classes, it's the number one thing you learn is you have to be critical of the numbers. Where are the numbers coming from? How are they getting the numbers? We're making very, very important decisions about our health and our economic, not health, survival, whatever you want to call it, things that are going to have very, very long lasting effects right now based on numbers that might not be all that accurate. And the problem is that the testing is not accurate. And so I just barely got into some of his information, but the argument was, and I've shared this article before too, is that Chinese study that said they had 80% false positives on their tests, since people have been quoting that, they retracted it. And the only thing they can say is, well, we're not really quite sure how those numbers got there. They didn't even have a good reason for retracting it. But regardless of that, apparently the testing that's being done, it it doesn't test specifically and solely for COVID. The test will come back positive, and it could be COVID. It could also be a very serious bacterial infection or another viral infection. So essentially, you could have rhinovirus, the common cold. You could have RSV. You could have any number of viruses in the respiratory illness family, and the test that they're using for COVID could come back positive, but you are assumed now to be positive for COVID. And I think that is really interesting because the numbers are ramping up now because we're testing more people. So if in fact this pans out, which, he's making a very well resourced, argument here, not even argument, just presenting the facts, that you're going to see the numbers go up because the more tests you do, the more false positives you get, the higher the numbers go. But what's the real number to watch for is the deaths. And they're not in the hundreds of thousands. They're not even anywhere near where people thought they would be. And he says the same thing. I know, wait a week. The peak is still coming. Wait a couple weeks. But nobody's seeing the death toll that they were projecting. And this could be part of it. I mean, you just have to take the time to read the article because I don't want to spend the whole time talking about it. But ultimately, it just made me think, because here in Wisconsin, every morning the news comes on and they show the map, and there's a spattering of counties that are across the very northern border of Wisconsin. There's a few counties up there that don't have any reported cases, but then you get one. Like, I think one of them must be Ashland County because I know that area. I was born there. So I see it on the map. I know what it is. And it's like, this county has one. This county has one. This county has one. Okay. And the counties below it have none. And it just makes you wonder, because initially I talked about too that the diagnosis changed. So initially they would only test people who had been to China, been to Wuhan, or been exposed to someone who'd been to Wuhan within 2 weeks. That was the first basic diagnostic testing criteria. And then it changed as we took it more seriously, and it's going to be more deadly. And we started testing anybody that presented with a serious enough set of symptoms. But what I heard here is that even if you go to the hospital right now or thereabouts, that people were being turned away for testing unless you were admitted. And when you were admitted, then they tested you because then they wanted to know what they were dealing with, if it was that serious. So again, if you're not testing everyone, that's a problem. But if you are testing everyone and you have 80% false positives, that's a problem too. So these one cases here and there, I'm thinking, okay, who's the one person in Ashland County? I highly doubt they were in Wuhan, China, or exposed to anyone from Wuhan, China, not in the last 2 weeks, but even in the last 2 months. Argue it's the last 2 months. How did anybody up there get exposed? One person, just one, and one person in the county over. I mean, there's a lot of people up there. This isn't a virus that's falling out of the air. You have to have contact with someone, right? That's the whole point. So how is it that there are tons of cases in very dense population areas, and then you get up north and it spatters out, and then there's this whole line of counties with nothing, and then there's 3 or 4 counties at the very top with one case. And so the fact that he's presenting about the testing makes sense, because you could potentially have any viral respiratory infection with any kind of set of serious enough symptoms. Apparently now even eye pain and a dry throat and loss of taste, and get this test and they'll say, yep, you're positive for COVID. They're not saying you're positive for potentially COVID or a serious bacterial infection or another viral infection. And that's something that is very inconvenient to the numbers, right? So again, it's something to think about in terms of what is it that we're really dealing with, so that we know how to actually, what's the word I want to say? Not responsibly, but appropriately respond, okay? And the idea that this isn't going to go away until we have a vaccine. Come on, are they going to make a vaccine for the common cold next? I mean, we know the flu vaccine is only 40% effective. You think this one's going to be any better? And there are rumors out there that that is what the end goal of this is, that this isn't going to go away, that this is going to become the next seasonal flu and the next mandated vaccine. So, argue whatever you want. But I'm just seeing more and more information from very well-educated people presenting very well-researched arguments that this isn't going to be as streamlined as what everyone wants it to be. It's going to be more complicated. There's going to be more pieces. And that is essentially what naturopathic medicine is at its heart. It's not one diagnosis and one treatment. It is treating the whole person with all of the parts. And so, if you're simply banking on hoarding all kinds of immune supplement products right now, and that's what's going to carry you through, you might want to step back for a minute and look at the foundational things, because you can't skip over the foundational steps and just bank on supplements. We know that with diet. I've seen it with patients that I treat. And we need to put the things that make health, that build the foundation in the body first. Otherwise, it's like building a house without a foundation, right? So you go so far down in the ground, right, and put in concrete, what are they called? Are they pylons? You put in these like footers maybe, and then you pour like the concrete basement on, and you do all this reinforcing, and then you build the house on top of it. I mean, what happens if I just went outside in this grass and started building walls and said, here's my house? There's no foundation, and it might last for a little while, but the first big storm to come along is going to knock it over, So that's the point. This was kind of a general overarching view of, everything to this point, and just things that I want people to start considering, because I think a lot of people are getting really, really caught up in A, the numbers, B, the cure and or the vaccine. And I don't think it's ever going to be solved that way. I don't think it's ever going to be that straightforward. So just my 2 cents for the day. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see what next week brings. Hopefully some more positive, upbeat information. All right. Have a good week, and I will talk to you then.